All right. Good morning, everyone. I am glad to finally have all of you guys in Zoom. I apologize for the technical difficulties that we had last week. Um, I also had some technical difficulties this morning with my first class. So when we're done here, I'm going to be calling Zoom support again and trying and try to make things a little bit easier on me, hopefully. Please wish me luck. Um, Yeah, love calling support. Anyway, um, so that being said, I'm going to try to get through this class faster than I would have liked because another problem I've been having is that it kicks me out after a certain amount of time. So we're going to get right into it. So while I'm pulling up this PowerPoint that we're going to go over, does anyone have any questions about class, because I know that we didn't really get a chance to talk about it all together. Um, yeah, how any burning questions about how class works and how things are going to be graded or anything? Not seeing anything, so we will just go on. If you have any questions, please let me know in the chat. We can stop and I can answer your questions. But like I said, we're going to dive right into this. Um, so Um, yeah, I had originally thought we would start out with some expectations and stuff, but probably not going to need this as much. Um, I apparently cannot put you guys into breakout rooms, so some of these meeting and discussion procedures are not going to be applicable until I figure out what is wrong with my Zoom account. So, um, from this agenda, the things that we are actually going to be able to do is review the weekly objectives. We're going to do a self-reflection instead of a discussion for that 3-2-1 introduction reading. We're going to go over key terms and concepts from the introduction. And then, yeah, we're going to take a look at the rhetorical analysis paper as a whole. So, we're going to keep trudging along. So, as you guys saw in the introduction, we are using the rhetorical appeals to think about how arguments are created. This first paper, we are thinking about how these rhetorical appeals can be used to craft an argument. We're not necessarily interested for this paper in inserting our own opinions or responding to the argument. We're solely looking at how argumentation works and how it can be effective or ineffective. So a quick reminder is that these rhetorical appeals are important to all of our papers. So if you feel uncertain about any of them, it's a tornado siren. If you feel uncertain about any of them, please let me know as soon as possible because it's going to be difficult to get a high grade on your paper if you don't understand these. But if you do understand these, should be easy. So as I said, let me know. So for our first paper, we are, as I said, doing a rhetorical evaluation. So we're looking at the text critically and breaking it down into its persuasive components, which is how we'll use the rhetorical appeals. We'll think about whether they're used effectively or ineffectively. We will move on. So I had intended for this to be a class discussion, but we're going to do it as a chat discussion because I can't hear every student, apparently. That's fun. Zoom University is lovely, guys. So in the chat, please respond to these prompts. 3 things that you learned from reading the introduction, 2 questions that you still have, and then 1 aspect that you found particularly interesting. So I'll give you guys about 4 minutes or so to craft your responses to these prompts. And yeah, there are no wrong answers here. I know some of you may have experienced the rhetorical appeals before in high school. Some of you may be encountering them for the first time. So, um, yeah, let me know what's making sense. What do you still have questions about? Has anyone responded in the chat yet? I'm not seeing anything and I'm getting kind of nervous. Oh, thank God. I was like, I do not need one more thing to not work. Right? Get those responses into me when you can. I decided that I'm gonna do like an extra credit thing for attending these meetings to kind of bridge the gap between them being optional and mandatory. Um, I also love giving us extra credit. So I will download the chat when the meeting's over and assign extra credit that way. So make sure to get your response there so that I can give you credit. And we will continue, but keep getting those responses in the chat. Um, so um, we're already kind of going over these in the chat. So we will skip that part. As I said, we're modifying my intention a bit due to the loveliness that is Zoom. So I want to talk a bit about argumentation because that is central to this course. I think coming out of an election year, we have this really negative view of what argumentation is. So it is not what these people are doing. Ha ha ha. When we think about argumentation and persuasion, we think about it in the context of using reasons to persuade someone to believe a certain opinion. It sounds pretty easy because it really is. And rhetoric, which is what we're thinking about when we learn about the rhetorical appeals, goes hand in hand with argumentation and persuasion. So when we think about rhetoric, we think about how we are purposefully and intentionally crafting a message, be it through language, symbols, etc. As someone noted, bumper stickers can be rhetorical instances as well to convey some sort of message that is meant to persuade someone. And with my example of the political year that we just came out of, rhetoric can be used nefariously. With fake news, misinformation, disinformation, and even conspiracy theories, it is easy to use these rhetorical appeals in a negative way because they are so persuasive and effective in most cases. So, in order to start thinking about how a rhetorical situation works, we have to think about the intended audience first. And this is key to all of our papers. So please take a mental note of these things that we go over. So when we think about who the intended audience is, unacceptable answers include anyone who can read, anyone who reads the article, and Americans in general. We need to be more specific than that on the assignments and for the paper. I don't want to see that. Telling you now. So when we try to come up with a more concise idea of who the target audience is, these are some questions that you can ask yourself. Who is the author trying to convince of their opinion? So who is likely to disagree with that opinion that the author would be trying to persuade? And also think about, why would the author be writing the article in the first place? Is he or she responding to something that happened? That can be an instance of intended audience identification as well. So instead of anyone who can read, here are some examples of specific audiences that could arise from editorials. Republicans who, keyword, telling me what they do, who are against expanding healthcare, Democrats who are against the widespread use of nuclear power, and then my personal favorite, Sheridans who are responsible for grading your paper. One person can be an intended audience, and I am your intended audience for everything that you do. So that's important to consider as you write and as you create your rhetorical moves. So there are a lot of ways to be rhetorically persuasive, but in this class we focus on the three oldest studied instances of appeals. Those are ethos, pathos, logos, and kairos. Not kairos. the three original ones are ethos, pathos, and logos. Those are the ones that Plato identified in his philosophy in ancient Greece. Kairos was added during the Roman Empire, so they're all very old, very tried and true, and very persuasive, as you guys can probably imagine. So there's more that goes into identifying ethos than the others, so we're going to spend a little bit more time going over that one. So ethos is about credibility and trustworthiness. Can you reasonably accept what a person is telling you based on who they are? So ethos based on the author or the source is one of the first ways that you will think about identifying ethos. So ethos can be the author's name being clearly stated at the beginning of the editorial. In many cases, you'll get a brief overview of their credentials, what degree they may hold, what their position may be, whether or not they're a member of a certain like national society for whatever they specialize in, those kinds of things. Set the stage for ethos very early. So you know that whoever is writing the article is a very trusted source. You'll also come across authors that are the editorial board. This is also a very ethos strong author. So when an article is written by an editorial board, it is, as you can imagine, written by a group of people, and the newspaper or the source that it comes from as a whole takes responsibility for what's being said. So because there is so much responsibility that goes along with the author of the editorial board, that can be considered a very strong source and a very strong ethos. Another example could be like relating what is being talked about to a personal experience. So my example in an article about student loan debt, the author who says, as a college student at K-State who has racked up over $20,000 in student debt, I yada, yada, yada. That is establishing the relationship between the author and the situation being described. So that is a very strong appeal to ethos as well. And there's also ethos based on the argument and the use of evidence. So this is where ethos and logos tend to intertwine well. And I do want to note that for the most part, there's no wrong answer. If you think that the argument and the use of evidence is ethos or logos, yeah, none of them are black and white. So don't be afraid about getting them exactly right. If you feel that the argument has an ethos appeal, then argue that case. So for an ethos appeal, the argument and the use of evidence is generally associated with the field of study that the author has. So a good example would be me. I have a strong ethos to write about Englishy things. Yeah, if you come across something that I wrote that talks about literature or language or whatever, you know that I am your English instructor, I am a grad student. You know that what I say is probably something that you can trust. Now, if I were to write a paper about like math, something that I don't know much about, you would know that because I am an English GTA, my ethos is not very strong to write about math subjects, and you should not trust what I am saying. Yeah, don't trust anything I write about math. Uh, so that's where I think that ethos is more present in the evidence being used, whereas logos looks at the evidence as a whole. But as I said, there are no wrong answers for that. And also the use of sources. So kind of along the same lines, if you're writing an article about biology, you would want to quote biologists. You would not want to quote English GTAs. Yeah. And then language. We love language. And ethos and language are strongly connected in these editorials. So using certain pronouns, especially we, can create a sense of unity between the author and the reader. And that is an appeal to being included, which is very strong. Um, so I could write about us as K-State students and build that relationship in an ethos sense. Also, the use of jargon. In biology, you can use technical, sciencey terms. In English, I could use literary terms. And the use of that field-specific language shows that I know what I'm talking about. In the case of English, my lack of technical terms in like math would cue you to the fact that I don't know what I'm talking about. So that's something that you can pay attention to also, is how does it sound like the author knows what they're talking about? If yes, that's a strong appeal to ethos. If not, they don't have any ethos and you should probably find something else to read. So let me know in the chat if ethos isn't making sense. I will be posting this PowerPoint to Canvas later so you can refer to it. But yeah, we will continue with pathos. And pathos tends to be the easiest appeal for students to pick up on because I think it's one of the more innate ones that we just understand as humans to react to strong feelings and respond to things that we are presented with. So, good ways to pick up on appeals to pathos, and when the author is trying to persuade you with those, be mindful of your own feelings. Note if you have a emotional response, be it positive or negative, to what's being written. Does it make you happy? Do you cry? Do you want to like go protest? Those are all appeals to pathos. And as with ethos, pathos can have a language component to it as well. Using specific language can be designed to make your audience respond more or less. Things like swear words, inflammatory language, and yeah, other things like that are linguistic appeals to pathos that I think are usually pretty easy to pick up on. Yeah. And then logos. Logos is my favorite, but unfortunately it tends to be the trickiest one for students to identify. So as I said, if you need to refer to this slide again or email me with any questions, please do so. So logos is how the argument makes sense. In more technical terms, is it valid? So what we think about is how do the reasons, do the premises that the author provides in his reasoning, his or her reasoning, fit together to support the conclusion that they draw. So in an image sense of what I just said, look at that puzzle that I have. So each individual piece is potentially a reason or a piece of evidence that the author uses to try to convince you to believe whatever they want you to believe. And it's when those pieces come together and form the puzzle that the logos is strong, that all of the pieces fit together perfectly and they prove the conclusion. They prove the main point of the argument that the author wants you to get. So some tricks to identify logos is, as I said, keeping track of those puzzle pieces and thinking about the evidence and the reasons that the author uses. How likely is it that those actually fit together, that that puzzle is actually going to be formed? And then does that piece actually fit in the puzzle, or does it perhaps fit in a different puzzle? That is a key way to identify the strength or the weakness of logos. And then another thing you can do is question how believable the argument is. Does the evidence that the author provides seem convincing? And this may not necessarily be what you believe, but maybe can the author get from point A to point B to point C to the conclusion in a realistic way? So you may not necessarily like what the puzzle's image is, but you can still identify that it is a puzzle that fits together well. Um, I hope that that makes sense. Once again, if something I said about logos doesn't make sense, let me know in the chat, but email and stuff also works too. And then Kairos. As I said, Kairos is a little bit newer than the other three, and I think it's pretty easy too. Kairos is about the timeliness of the argument. So should generally be easy to identify. Arguments that are present in the news, that are going around on social media, tend to be very kairotic. Things that aren't kairotic could be like universal women's suffrage, where the argument is important, but thankfully it happened 100 years ago, so it's not a very timely argument. Yeah. I also don't really know who's getting their news from Pinterest, but I guess if you found an article there, it would be kairotic too. We were going to do breakout rooms, but Zoom hates me. So we're going to go past this. But this is just, we were going to do something similar to the assignment that you have due tonight, in which you look at an image and discuss the use of the rhetorical appeals. So we might do that next week if Canvas will allow me. Yeah, so the rhetorical evaluation essay, that is the thing that is coming up in about 3 to 4 weeks. It's due February 19th. So kind of keep that date in the back of your mind that you may need to devote more time and effort to this class than usual. So if you need to, manage your time accordingly. But that deadline is set in stone and will be here faster than all of us think. So that paper, as you figured out, is a rhetorical analysis. It's not like I've not said it a million times. So you'll be reading an editorial of your choice from the articles that I've selected that are on Canvas, which I think are very interesting. I hope you like them. There's a variety of topics, so hopefully something is relatively interesting to you. And in all of these articles, the author is trying to get you to adopt a certain point of view. Yeah, I know. So you'll be analyzing how that author creates that argument, how that author moves to persuade you to their opinion, and whether it's effective or ineffective. I will note that it may very well be ineffective in your opinion, and that is totally fine to write about. I had an article last semester where I just thought the argument was horrible, and my students wrote about that. So don't feel like you need to say that the appeals are effective. Perfectly fine to say that they're ineffective. So your task in creating this analysis is to convince your reader, which is me and like other academics in a broad sense, that the editorial that you read makes an argument that is likely or unlikely to convince the intended audience. So going back, if it's unlikely, that's perfectly fine. And there may be a mix of both. Some appeals may be effective while others aren't. And that's fine to have a mix in your paper, but you will need to decide whether or not the argument is effective overall or not. So keep that in mind. This is what the week ahead looks like. You will also find the PowerPoint there after class. I will upload it. And I would like you all to note the invention activity. That's the assignment that is in blue. It's due on Wednesday night, and this activity tends to take students a while to complete. So I urge you not to start it at like 10 o'clock on Wednesday night. I don't think that you will like it yourself or me for that decision. It is designed to give you a very thorough idea of what you will write about in your paper. So a good effort on this assignment should make writing the paper a lot easier. So I urge you to give it 110% effort because more effort now is less effort as you're actually writing your paper. And yeah, you can refer to this slide later. This is where in the Top Hat textbook certain things can be found if you're having difficulty doing any of these things. So I think it is very helpful. And then, yeah, just a final, are there any burning questions about the appeals? Any comments that you want to make? Did I give you like an epiphany about any of these things? Or not, that's fine too. Give you like a moment to either unmute yourself and let me know or to say something in the chat, but then if there's nothing, we will wrap this up. All right. I hear the crickets, so I will end that.